Now that we've done those game theory bargaining model examples and read Amartya Sen, let's now rewind and think about what game theory is showing us. One of the most important contributions of game theory is to point out the role of what is called the fallback position. The position in which if I exit the game, if I don't choose X and stick with my partner, but I leave and choose Y instead, what options do I have? And what we found both from the models that we did in our homework and from Amartya Sen's reading and from the data, that the fallback position, the existence of alternatives, strengthens your bargaining power. So if we think of households as a realm of cooperative conflict, then one thing that we need is, while we might cooperate for production, the way that Becker says, we are in competition for distribution in terms of who benefits more or less from this household. And for that, women need strong fallback options. They need income security, they need autonomous wages, so that they are not in the position of invisibility. Because if your labor is invisible, your contributions to the household are invisible. If your contributions to the household are invisible, then your bargaining power when you negotiate to get a better cut from your family under the rules of the game will not be very good. So invisibility of women's labor undermines their bargaining power. Two, absence of autonomous things like outside income undermines women's bargaining power. So part of what feminist economists point out using game theory is that as long as Becker treated the household as a place where there was just one time that people were making a choice, it wasn't like lifelong, and where he treated comparative advantage as relatively static, where the decision you made this year had no impact on your well-being, your bargaining power, your capacity to be able to have a greater say in your household in the future, he was able to make that model. But game theory tells us that we have to actually pay attention to how the game is unfolding. And if that's the case, women's fallback positions turn out to be a very important thing. Hence, while Becker might argue that women should stay at home because that's the comparative advantage, feminists say, well, that's all very well. You're having growth, production, but you're not paying attention to equity and distribution. Efficiency is just one economic goal. Equity is another. And for that, you need to make sure that women have very strong fallback positions so that they can have strong bargaining power. A second thing that this points out is that just the existence of a fallback changes the outcome inside the bargain. Remember that just because in our model we saw that as long as the women had a good fallback, that meant that her partner and her family didn't try and pressure her to give way because they knew that then she would just leave. So the second thing is the existence of these alternative options doesn't only help the women who use them, it helps women who don't use them, because as long as that exists, that means I've got a good fallback. That's going to change my interaction inside my family. And we all know this. Think about, for example, immigrant rights. The moment I know that I have a strong visa situation, it's not going to be so easy for an employer to abuse me and violate labor law, right? Because I got a fallback position. I can go to the law. But if I don't have that, I don't have a fallback. I don't have bargaining power. If there is a domestic violence shelter, I have a fallback. If I start facing abuse, I can call them. This will not only help the women who use the shelter, just culturally, the awareness that this is there, it changes the dynamic between men and women. So both in terms of perceived contributions, in terms of fallback, and perceived interest. If in fact Becker is right and men are more altruistic, the results we saw should have been very different. But instead, the data suggests that for cultural reasons, women do tend to prioritize the well-being of their children more than they prioritize their own well-being. And what Sen pointed out is if that's what happens, you will not bargain hard for yourself. You will instead devote your time bargaining for your children, but not necessarily for your own well-being. Right? So what this means is bargaining power becomes the underlying basis for a whole slew of policies. Yes, including healthcare, including childcare, including nutrition, including education, which are going to become the basis of how we improve women's status through the economics of gender. The key here is that we can't just lean in and culturally train women to have a stronger mindset, because you can't do that if they don't have any bargaining power. If women have no bargaining power in corporations and they just keep trying to lean in, all that's going to happen is they're going to be told, if you don't behave yourself, you will lose your job. You are very difficult to work with. If, on the other hand, they have counteroffers, they have other jobs they can go to, they can open their own businesses, then they don't have to put up with that. And it changes the culture of the workplace. So overall, both inside and outside the house, you're beginning to see that rather than purely cultural parameters, policy parameters are central to shaping household dynamics, household relations. And going back to the HDI and the Gender Development Index and even the Gross Happiness Index, lot of work promoting people's fallback options, their alternate safety nets, improves their bargaining position. And when they improve the bargaining position vis-a-vis society, it will improve bargaining position vis-a-vis families, and vice versa. That is the biggest insight for feminist economics, that we don't have to assume all our bargaining has to only come by bargaining inside the household with our family. In fact, we can change family dynamics by bargaining with the state to give us more childcare, by bargaining with corporations to change how they do promotion so that I have a better fallback with a better income, by bargaining with the city to provide more domestic violence shelters, by bargaining with my community and my church to ensure that there is more service provision for families, right? All of these things are not only good in themselves, they actually are the fastest way in which we can attain gender equity inside the house. So instead of thinking of culture as something that starts at the house and then spreads to the rest of the world, flip it. Starts at the rest of the world, starts with policy, creates a nice environment within which we can access our rights. That is the central insight of feminist economics, which is why when we move further on, we're going to see that labor markets turn out to be a really important area for feminist economics, because it is through wage work that most of us obtain our fallback positions.